Hemshech Chaim Beis. Good morning, Hemshech Chaim Beis, Volume 2. We're on page 1190. Speaking about the Yadaita Ayin v'shavesa levavecha ki Hashem hu Elokim b'shamayim mimal v'ala'aretz mitochas and Einoid, but focusing on that section, b'shamayim mimal, heaven above and earth below. And we learned yesterday, we had an overview in general, and we learned that this is primarily Mamata L'mayla. We're talking about an Aveda Mamata L'mayla, not like Ata Hares Ladas, or the mitzvah Li'achdei, to unify God. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which is all from the top down, like Torah, revealed from above. But here we're talking about the Aveda V'yadaita Yem, a commandment to us, V'yadaita, that we should come to understand and recognize Hashem Elokim Mamata L'mayla. So everything we've been discussing is how we work our way from the bottom up. Even Yechudei Law, that in V'yadaita, meaning V'yadai Das Elyon, is also coming following Das Tachten. If you recall, when he spoke about three levels, like the three levels of the three Shabbos meals. First, you begin with the Birur. First, you begin with Birurim of the weekdays, and the Birur within Shabbos. The Birur within weekdays, which concludes at the end, which is the first meal of Shabbos. So that's still refining the world. I'm referring now when I'm going back to the page where he spoke the three levels. Page 1179. So he spoke about the first. You start with finding the Ayin and the Yesh Nivra, that in the Yesh, you direct the Yesh by discovering the divine within it. That leads to the second level, which is Eichel Mitoich Eichel. In holiness itself, in Kedusha itself, you're now coming to a level of Das Elyon, which was the lower level of Das Elyon, which he called the Bitl of Re'usa Deliba. Not a Veda al Pitam V'das, but now it's the desire of the heart. But it's still coming through contemplation that God is beyond existence, but it's still mamata, it's still coming, but it still relates, and it's still, as he called it, Shiluv Adnei B'Havaya, Chudei Law, Das Elyon of Atzilus, Achamitis in Das Elyon, then brought to the third level. The true Das Elyon is the Etzem, which is even higher than Birurim altogether, as he explained on page 1179, 1180. So we see that V'yadaita Yem is all Mamata L'mayla. So even when you get to the higher levels of awareness, it all began from the bottom up. And that's what we learned. From the bottom up, meaning from the Tzimtzum, from Elokim, we come to Havaya. From the Tzimtzum, we come to recognize, as he called the Rotze, that your Mamshech Havaya, that the Tzimtzum is B'shvil HaGili, the work of transforming the Tzimtzum, the concealment. Now, to explain this, we began learning that at times it says twice Havaya hu Elokim. What's the meaning when it says twice Havaya Elokim? And he cited Rashi, the Rashi in Sheftim, Siman Hey, that distinguishes that from the Medrash Agoda, that they said Anechi Hashem Elokecha, and Bahar Carmel Elio, they said twice Havaya Elokim. So that's where we stopped. The twice Havaya Elokim. And what is this inyan? So I gave a general introduction, what we're going to learn now. He's going to basically explain that there's two elements in transforming the Tzimtzum as we climb from Elokim to Havaya, Havaya Elokim, in V'yadaita Hayim. Remember, Hayim is also comprised of day and night, Tzimtzum and Gilui, concealment and revelation. That there's two levels of transforming the Tzimtzum, where we go from first discovering the Eir HaGvul, and then discovering the Eir HaBligvul. That's what he's going to explain now. Okay. I said I would look up the Rashi just to see the language there. You know what? Just give me a second and let me bring the Rashi right now. 1 second. What does Rashi say? Sheftim. So right at the beginning of Sheftim, Hey, Kapitel Hey, chapter 5, he says like this. He's talking about Vatosher Dveira. This is Dveira's song after the war with Sisra, and Barak won the war. So then Dveira said a Shiur. We actually say this in Parsha B'Shalach in the Haftarah. So in the third verse, this is what she says. Shimu Malachim Hazinu Reiznim Anoichi Lashem Anoichi Ashira Azamer Lashem Elokei Yisrael. Says twice the word Anoichi. Anoichi Lashem Anoichi Ashira. Says Rashi, Anoichi Kofel. The fact that she says twice Anoichi, it's double. Shemaiti Medrash Agoda. The Rashi is saying, I heard a Medrash Agoda. That's the Medrash the Rebbe Rashab is citing. Okay, so it goes on. Lekopachschar Tabu v'kalma shabo l'matan teira losis aleim es atera v'chozru. A second. Beis apan amam HaKadosh Baruch Hu serves. Okay, Rashi says the lashon nemar b'sinai. Nemar b'sinai anechi Hashem Elokecha b'karmel ye'omer kofel Hashem Elokim b'mei Eliyahu. That's what Rashi says. So it's interesting. The Rebbe Rashab changes. Instead, it says there, Nemar. He writes here, Amru. Not sure why. And the question was asked, what's Amru? Who said it? Nemar makes sense. It was said. Anyway, there he's talking about how God will repay them double because of the Mesiras Nefesh they had at Har Carmel, which is the story of Eliyahu. That's why twice Anoichi. That's what Rashi brings. So I still have to figure out where the word Amru came from. I'll have to do more research. But there it says Nemar in the Rashi in our print. Okay. But regardless, what we have is twice Havaya Elokim. And now the Rebbe Rashab asked, "V'tzarich lahav ma'u beis pamim Havaya Elokim." What is this double Havaya Elokim? Rashi just says that God repays them with a double. But what does it mean? What is its significance? Acha inyan hu. The inyan is in this. He's going to explain now. The answer is the inyan is bar le'il was explained earlier in the Maimer. Dibra maskil v'hi ha'onon v'acheshach v'yoyer. This is a Maimer that he said back in Pesach Maimer, which I referred to yesterday. I'll just give you exactly the place. Pesach Maimer, page 934. So what we learned there was the discussion at length of how you transform the Tzimtzum, the concealment, into Gili, into revelation. So he said, what did we learn there? That Tzimtzum who bebeis in Yonim. The Tzimtzum of Elokim that God employed in order to create existence had two effects. It's in two dimensions, two levels, two inyanim. Echad, the first is Mashinistalaka Erein Sof Shalifnei Tzimtzum Hu Erein Sof HaBligvul. The first thing is that the infinite light that dominated, that encompassed everything, in the words of the Eitz Chaim, that Kedem Shenivrei before the world was created, the Erein Sof, the divine consciousness, encompassed everything. Mamala Kolam Mitzias V'lo Yoyin Nesinis Mokum Klal Elamis Klal. And there was no room at all, no space. Think of the teacher, his infinite intelligence is all-consuming. There's no room for any other. So the first thing that Tzimtzum did was to conceal that. He uses the word siluk, nistalik, which means to remove, but we know that's not Tzimtzum kipshute. It doesn't mean literally. Removed means it's so concealed as if it's removed. So that's impact number one. That the Erein Sof HaBligvul, all the infinite, endless, unbounding energy was concealed. The kasher Ein Sof will be gili b'mokem hacholol. Because when Ein Sof, when the infinite divine light and energy and consciousness is revealed in this empty space, mokem hacholol means the space that would later become, after the Tzimtzum hacholol, an empty space. When Ein Sof is revealed there, which of course is conceptually, nitfas b'pshitus b'chinas Ein Sof. What is experienced as a given, b'pshitus, elikus b'pshitus means what is the natural experience? What is the natural state of consciousness? B'chinas Ein Sof. V'amitzias, and existence, hu b'chinas Chassidus. Existence is a novelty because there's no. It needs to be. It's something that would not be there on its own. So this is where the expression comes from, Elokus b'pshitus and Elmis b'schachus. That godliness is the given reality, and the worlds and existence is a novelty. After the Tzimtzum, it's the reverse. Existence is a given, and Elokus is a novelty. Like the story that I often repeat, that this one thinks about God all day. Why? Because he knows he exists. So his question is, does God exist? God is the Chiddush. And the Chassid thinks about about himself all the time, because God is a given reality. So his question is, do I exist? Why do I exist? And so on. So bottom line is, before the Tzimtzum, what the Ein Sof HaBligvul that was completely all-encompassing, omnipresent, did not leave room for anything. And what's given there is only other course. Mitzias is a skachus. That's exactly why you need the Tzimtzum. That's the first effect. But he goes on to explain a little more about this. The be'efen kazeh yeh lo asid. In this manner, this will be the consciousness in the future. In the future, once we transform the Tzimtzum, we're going to come to a state where Elokus is pshitis. Everything is divine, and existence is a novelty, is the so-called superimposed state. So Lashid Lavi will be aware of that. Today, we're not. That your sons and daughters will prophesize. There will be prophecy by children. And will not be a wonder at all. It won't be like a miracle. As was explained in the Maimer of Pesach, the one I just cited, Vahi ha'anon. So the Asad Lavi will be a state where we will come to complete divine is the only reality. Existence will exist, but it will be the novelty, will not be the given. And when then the Tzimtzum came and concealed this infinite light, this consciousness, now what happens is, what did the Tzimtzum accomplish first? Its first objective, its first effect, impact, that what is nitfas b'pshita is that which we grasp as a given. Pshitas means it's a given. It's the obvious. Hubchinas hametzias is the existence of a world. What is pshitas now? Is when you wake up in the morning, you don't feel God, you feel yourself. We look around, existence comes first, I'm here, and then you look for God. The hergesh aleki hubchinas is chachus. And a divine sensation, a divine feeling is the novelty. So mamish reverse, complete inside out. Before the Tzimtzum, the hand was the ikar, and the glove that would come is clearly a glove to the hand, a secondary thing. Now the glove is more important or primary, and the hand inside the glove is concealed. So like the world is inside out, that the physical, the existence as we know it, comes first, and then the second, the novelty, is the discovering the divine. So, which of course tells you that what kind of shift happened. This is impact number one of the Tzimtzum. So the Tzimtzum, the effect is in the Eir HaBligvul, that infinite divine consciousness now is a novelty after the Tzimtzum because it's been concealed. That's one effect, and a necessary one for existence to be. But it's not enough. There was another thing that Tzimtzum did. The Beis, the second effect or impact an inyan of the Tzimtzum, Tzimtzum be'er pnimi. This is the Tzimtzum in the er habligvul, like the er save of er makif, in the whole general, all-encompassing, infinite light that was there before the Tzimtzum. But the Tzimtzum also had an impact on the er pnimi, which is the second track of divine energy that God chose to use, that would become the force that would permeate and tailor and engage with and create existence. Remember, before the Tzimtzum, both those tracks are all one, because everything is submerged and encompassed in the divine consciousness. But when you break it down, there's a source for the all-encompassing Er HaBligvul, this infinite consciousness, which, as we just explained, is concealed, but also God's Shir Atzmei B'Kayach. Remember, God envisioned in the 10 hidden spheres, which would become the root of the Er Pnimi, the imminent energy that would be the Kav, that would emerge after the Tzimtzum, that would draw down the divine plan. Because remember, the Er HaBligvul, the concealment of that just allows room for a consciousness of another. But he says, Elim is b'mitzias, mitzias b'pshitis, and a lekuz b'yischachus. But we still need to create an existence here. We still don't have a world. We don't have a structured existence. That concealment only creates a space. So what is the Tzimtzum's impact on the Er Pnimi that is necessary, the paintbrush, to shape existence? Not the intention of not just the divine infinite. So the second impact of the Tzimtzum, this is all from the Maimer, the Vayihi Ha'anon Pesach Maimer that I just referred you to back in page Tov Tov Kuf Lamadalat, I think I said, yeah. 934, yeah. What's the second impact? Hatzimtzum be'er pnimi. The tzimtzum in the imminent energy. Shenitfes teich helem hatzimtzum. The er pnimi, which was nitfes beteich helem hatzimtzum, means that the concealment of the tzimtzum was also, the er pnimi was also affected. Nitfes means grasped, contained, but impacted by the tzimtzum. So the er pnimi is also impacted. And in what way? V'hu hakav, v'hu er hakav. This is the light of the thin ray of light that comes after the tzimtzum. Shenisalim teich nekudus harashimu, that gets concealed in the concentrated point of the reshimu. The reshimu is the trace that remains after the concealment, the tzimtzum. The reshimu is like the trace of the letters. You don't see it, but it's concealed. So the kav is impacted by that. It's concealed in that. I'll explain that in a moment. So now we're talking about how the kav is concealed, impacted by the tzimtzum, being impacted by the reshimu, and within the reshimu, and within all the worlds, from the highest, and the kelim, from the highest levels to the lowest levels. Ad elam is biyah, all the way down to the worlds of Bri, Yitzira, Asiya, Sha'er Muster V'Nelam Legamri, where the light is completely covered and concealed. Commission is Bar Le'el Be'erech. As we learned that length above where the Pesach Maimer and the continuing discourses after that. So let me explain now what the second effect of the Tzimtzum is. And what I'm saying now is really a review of the Maimer of Pesach, of Vayihi Ha'anon V'Acheshech V'Yoed. So the in brief, it works like this. This may be familiar to you. You may have learned it earlier here, or you may have learned it elsewhere in Chassidus. Because God wanted the creation and existence to happen in a way that makes sense, so everything has a logical sequence and a logical process, including each step. So let's go back to the analogy of the artist. Just a good analogy to describe all the different dynamics necessary to get a piece of art on canvas, which is the mashal, the example to create a world, a structured world, which is God's art. So what happens here? The artist, we're talking even on a human level. The artist is beyond being an artist. We know that. He chooses to become an artist or to reveal the fact that he has the talent of being an artist. The artist is still at that stage, infinite possibilities. He can create all types of art. He chooses among the infinite possibilities one type of art. Now, that's still not enough. He now needs to conceal all those infinite possibilities because he needs to focus on this piece of art. He can't be sitting, you see this all the time, writers, artists. If you're all consumed with all the different possibilities, you end up not writing or painting anything. So he needs to silence, so to speak, his mind from all the infinite possibilities and focus on the art that he's going to create. But it's still not enough. What does the art consist of? It's not just enough to quiet the bligvul and the infinite possibilities. He also has to now focus on the art, and it cannot be with the full intensity as it was part of the infinite possibilities. Remember, this one possibility is equal to all the infinite from the point of view of the artist. They all have the intensity of his infinite capacity, his infinite potential. So he has to do a second thing. Besides concealing the infinite possibilities, he now has to make sure that his focus on the 10 spheres, which would be the art, is complete and laser sharp and not being distracted, I just said, but more than that, that it should now be focused on what it has to create. So what does he have to do? Is to take his vision of this art, this specific piece of art. He has to translate that vision into a plan. That plan has to become translated into his seichel, his intelligence. And then the intelligence has to inform his body, his fingers, and all of his being. And he needs to have the paint and all the details and a paintbrush to now draw the actual art. Now again, this is because God wants it to be understood by us. Of course, all this could be done like that. God says, I want a world. There's a world. But he doesn't want it that way. He wants it with a structure. Asar by Moris Nivra Elam. He created the world with 10 statements. Bereshis bar Elokim. Each day has its energy, Oir, Rekia, and so on. So now he needs, the second aspect of his Tzimtzum is to make sure that the flow of from his mind into the paintbrush, which is going to be the kav, should be exact, not more, not less, because now he has to create details. So the kav, which in this case is like the divine paintbrush, but it's not an outside paintbrush. Think of it as the flow of consciousness from the infinite teacher to the specific recipient, the students, the art specifically to the individual. So now the kav, what he calls here is nislab. So what's the nimshal? And I'll get back to the language here. So God is the artist who's beyond being artist. The infinite possibilities, the sphere Saint Ketz, the infinite possibilities, the 10 hidden spheres is God envisioning the art of existence. The Tzimtzum has to conceal all the bligvul possibilities. And the second thing it has to do is to make sure that now, after the Tzimtzum comes a kav, that it's not just going to be wild and reconnect to the light before the Tzimtzum and then do whatever, all the different possibilities. It has to be focused. So the kav has to now be influenced by and informed by the Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum conceals its bligvul, as we said, but it also turns it into a narrow flow of a thread. And that thread is mislabish, like he says, nitfis, I just used the word, nitfis b'teich helamat tzimtzum. So it's not, the kav is not bypassing the tzimtzum. It's not like, okay, you made a concealment, and now we're just going to go back and let's bring the light back from before the tzimtzum. The kav has to be impacted by the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum is informing it, impacting it. And what that means is the Eir HaKav gets concealed in the Nekudis HaReshimu. What's the Reshimu? The Reshimu is a trace of the envisioning of the Oisius. Remember, Goliv Gelifu B'Tehirei La, Bereishu Menusa Demalka, Goliv Gelifu, that when God envisioned existence, he actually envisioned containers. There are no containers yet. It's Sheirish HaKav. So just like there's the Eir HaGvul, which is the Eir Pnimi, the energy that the artist invests in what the vision is in this specific piece of art, but he also is envisioning the structure of it. That will be Chochmah and Bina and all the other spheres, and Atzilus, and Bri Yitzira. So the Kav now enters into the Nekudas HaReshimu, which comes together with the Tzimtzum, is the concealment, but the Reshimu is a concealed state of the root of the containers. The Kav, in other words, is not bypassing, it is traveling through all these checkpoints, if you wish, all these regulators that are shaping it, that it should be able to enter into the Kelim, Ir HaChochma into Kelei HaChochma, Ir Habina into Klei Habina. The power of vision in the eye, the power of hearing in the ear, in a structured, existent way. So you have energy, the divine energy, but a divine energy that is commensurate and is shaped and defined, Elokus, Yehi Oir, Yehi Rakia. So it's very specific. It's the Ayin Eloki, the divine energy that enters into each specific creation according to its needs. Not more, not less. The first Tzimtzum in the Eir HaBlikvul doesn't do that. That just changes the consciousness that there should be room, that existence should be the given, and the Lakush should be the novelty. So we have room for another consciousness. The Tzimtzum in the Eir HaKav, in the Eir HaPnimi, in Eir Pnimi, is to create a shaped divine energy that is tailored to each specific aspect of existence. Whether it's a stone, whether it's Daimim, Tzemeya, Chai, Medaber, whether it's Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, Asiya, all the higher levels. So the Kav, therefore, is working hand in hand. So by the artist, the paintbrush isn't just doing whatever it wants. The paintbrush is working very closely with the paint and with all the details in order to shape it into a very defined structure. That's the second impact of the Tzimtzum on the Eir Pnimi. As I said, all this is explained much better and more detail in the Maimer, Pesach Maimer, back page 934. So, okay. So this is all introduction to explain the 2 times Hashem or Elokim, because what we're going to learn is that you want to transform both elements of the Tzimtzum. You want to be able to recognize the divine within the tailored shape of existence within the Kav. And you want to be able, in other words, look at existence and see the divine power within it. And you also want to come to the higher level of consciousness, the Yichud De'Elah level, Das Elyon, that what? The Eir HaBlikvul, that the true reality is godliness and not existence. Remember, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra teaches us that the Yesh knows that it has an Ayin within it, a divine force within it, which is step 1. But step 2 is you want to come to the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, where there the whole consciousness is different. That reality is godliness and existence is the novelty, as it will be lost of love. So he's going to explain that everything we learned about Das Tach and Das Elyon comes down to these 2 stages, and we're all talking about Mata Lamaila, going from the bottom up. And that's going to be the 2 things, Havaya Elokim, the 2 meanings of Havaya Elokim. Like you said, Elokim is Elokim, the Tzimtzum on every possible level. If you remember, we learned yesterday. And we're going to learn now the 2 basic general levels of the divine within existence and the divine that's beyond existence, where the divine is primary and existence is secondary or novelty. Okay. Before I continue, because this is a big topic, and again, I refer you back to that Maimer and Pesach Maimer, but somebody wants to ask anything, let me stop a moment before I continue. As I said yesterday, this is all very dense and short because he's relying that we learned the Maimorim earlier. So, does anybody want to ask anything? Okay. Continuing on. Vihine, and now, Kol Mashin is barely ill. Everything we learned earlier, that was discussed, explained earlier, Be'inyan Hipuch HaTzimtzum, about transforming the Tzimtzum, because we want to now retrace the steps. This Tzimtzum was necessary to create Tachtenim, to create existence, which was what God desires on both levels of the Tzimtzum, both impacts. But that's not where the story ends. Now we need to do something about it. We need to now go and transform the Tzimtzum, so through it should become the revelation. That's the whole purpose of Avodas Adam. That's the purpose why we're here. Kol zeh hu ba'er pnimi. Everything we learned about transforming the Tzimtzum was all about the pnimi, about the immanent energy, the energy that enters into existence. Shebo b'bchinas hislapshus, that enters and manifests in an enclosed way. Hislapshus, remember, is not makif. Hislapshus is like putting on a garment. The garment fits the person who's dressing the garment. So you're talking about the pnimi, immanent energy that gets enclosed and manifest within existence. V'yisalmus, b'bchinas hislapshus v'yisalmus, enclosed and concealed. So all about the transforming of the Tzimtzum, we're talking about its impact on pnimi, where the divine is concealed and enclosed and concealed. And what's the kavanah? Shaydei harotzei, back to the word rotzei. He used it before in the parentheses. He used it at length in the Maimorim earlier. Rotzei means that the human being on earth is yearning for and is seeking the divine. It's our search. That through the rotzei, shenase b'chinas kli. So if there's no Aveda, the Tzimtzum did its work. It concealed the divine, and look at existence right now. If you don't think about it, you don't open your eyes, you don't work on yourself. Right now, what do you see? You see a world. And you could easily call it an agnostic universe where people deny that there's anything more than me. Survival of the fittest. We are here. The Tzimtzum did its job well. Not even talking about the Tzimtzum and the Bligvul. Talking about the Tzimtzum and the Gvul and the pnimi. The divine energy with which existence could not exist for 1 second, like he says in Shayach V'Amunah, needs to be constantly renewed, is concealed. But that's not where we want it to remain. So now we need a rotze. We need to feel that not content. We need to feel restless. The restlessness of the rotze, of the yearning, of the searching, of the tzemoyim, the thirst, is what begins to shake things up. It reverses the process, and the tzimtzum and we're not satisfied and content with the tzimtzum, and we begin to seek, and that makes the person and the world into a keli. For what? For the air that's concealed within it. So he's saying everything we learned about transforming this tzimtzum was in the air pnimi. V'hainu. And what does this mean in Aveda? This is the Aveda, what we call Avedas HaBirurim. Again, you see how brief he is. I'm adding a lot of explanation because he's just summing up things we learned in the last 200 pages. Or even more now, 300-400 pages, to be honest. And what did we learn? That's what Birurim is. What's Birur mean? Clarification. Something is confused, something is mixed up. You have pselis b'teich echel and echel b'teich pselis. The nutrients, even on a physical level, and the waste are all combined. In this world, kedusha and klipa are all mixed together. Klipa snega, which means like the bright clip, even though it's bright and transparent, it's still a clip, it conceals. Essentially, the fruit is concealed within the shell, within the peel. That's the word klipa, peel. Lifnei Tzimtzum, it was the other way around. There was no peel. It was all about godliness. But here we live, godliness is concealed within existence. And what's our work of clarifying? Birur means to separate and to clarify. When you say a birur halacha even, you come to a Rav. He has to hear all the arguments and then clarify and separate the truth from the not truth. In Aveda, it's separating the Kedusha, the divine spark that remains in Beislapshus or Beisalmos, is enclosed and dressed up and concealed in the fruit, like on bread alone, man does not live. It's on the spark of the divine in the bread. So if you just take a piece of bread, God forbid, and just indulge, no bracha, no kedusha, nothing, so then you're just feeding into this world, the tzimtzum. However, you recognize this bread, hameitzi lechem min haaretz. Baruch atah Hashem l'kenim elchem hameitzi lechem min haaretz. You wash your hands. You make the right bracha. Bracha hamshacha. You redeemed the spark, the Meitzah Pi Hashem that's concealed in it, and now you've freed it and redeemed it. This is Avedus HaBirur. The same thing is at our work, our money, our homes, every physical interaction, everything in this world is about Birur, which is to separate and to clarify. The divine, lahavdil ben kedesh l'cheil, or to do chulin al taras hakedesh, masechel l'shem shemayim, b'chol drachecha de'eyu. That everything, whether it's a mitzvah like tefillin, where you take the parchment and you turn it into a holy item, whether it's stam, sefer Torah, tefillin, or mezuzah, or you take tzemer, wool, and you turn it into tzitzis, or you take natilas yadayim, you take the water, and you wash the hands. I'm just using examples he gave. Or frankly, any mitzvah, an esrog, a matzah, whatever it is, what you're doing is you're taking the material world where the tzimtzum conceal the divine and the kav from us, and we're reversing the process, we're transforming the tzimtzum, and that's through the rotzei, that yearning, our seeking, and that's what he calls, he says, V'hainu aideha birurim. These are the birurim. When we say birurim, means the clarifications or the separations and the clarifications we make. Hein ha-birurim debiyah, both the birurim in bri yitzir asiyah, which of course is a lower level. V'hein ha-birurim, v'hein ba-birurim datzilus, and also the clarifications in Atzilus. If you recall, even in Atzilus, even in Shabbos, he said there's also a level of birur, eichel miteich eichel. In Biyah, it's Eichel and Pselas, there's a Yesh. So you have to clarify between the divine and that which is not so divine, or it's secondary, the waste. In Atzilus, you don't have Pselas, but you do have Eichel Metech Eichel, clarifying from one food to one level of Kedusha to a higher level of Kedusha, as we discussed. So all these are Birurim. Sha'idei through these birurim, through these clarifications and separations and refinement and elevation, through this, you're revealing, is radiating and illuminating the Eir the way it's higher than it was in its state of concealment. So the Tzimtzum caused it to be concealed. And now, by revealing it, you're drawing down the Eir, how it is beyond, above the concealed state, because you've revealed. We learned earlier, we don't feel it necessarily today. But as I explained, it's munach b'kufsa, it's like placed in a chest, and the world has become more refined. And ultimately, when Mashiach comes, all of it will be revealed. The liyesh alideha birurim, being, and this is because being, that through these birurim, through these clarifications, through these purifications, separations, and so on, that's the idea of transforming, transforming, and the opposite of the tzimtzum. That's what birurim do, come to counter the effects of the concealment by revealing. Nasim keli legili eid elyon. Existence and everything within existence becomes kalim, containers and vessels, channels for the Gilead Elyon, for the revelation of a great, powerful light. Well, maybe the niggin I didn't say completely right. Let me see. The liyas. The niggin is a little different. Same idea. The liyas idea berurim, because being that through these berurim, which is the opposite, encounters the tzimtzum, nasim kelim the Gilead Elyon, it makes them into kelim of the Gilead Elyon. It's still not the finished end of the sentence. That was the beginning. It makes existence into containers for Eir Elyon. Meir behem. That causes that meir behem ha'er k'maishu l'mayla misalmus. Like he said. No, it's because birurim create the kelim. That's why it radiates the Eir the way it's higher than his salmus. Because once you're a keli, now you can receive the light as it is higher than the concealment that the Tzimtzum caused. And this itself is a step-by-step process. It's an organized step-by-step, right? Like we read it yesterday. That's about darge ache darge, not like Torah. That has to go step by step. You can't jump, when you're climbing a ladder, you can't jump 10 rungs. You have to go step by step by step. So this is all the process of becoming a Birurim that creates Kalim, which in turn draws down light that's higher than the concealment. Add to the extent, and again, this is a summary of everything we learned earlier. Ad shegam ba'er yesh b'chinas rotzei. To the point that also the oir now, not just down below, we and the Kalim have a rotzei, but the oir has a rotzei. The oir has its natural yearning. You're revealing the rotzei of the oir. That through that radiates the inner and the core dimension of oir. Again, he says, as it was explained above at length. He said it twice, in just a few lines, because this is very brief summary of what we've learned earlier. So now what we've come to this understand from this, that not just did this world and biyah turned upward and is now ready receiving light that's higher than concealment, but also the higher levels of light are now also been turned around. Instead of being drawn down and concealed in existence, they are now yearning and reaching upward to the Sheirish Ha'er, which is even higher than the Eir in the Kalim. If you remember when he said the three levels, first was Birurim. First we have to take the Yesh and make it a Keli Talakus and recognize the Ayin of the Yesh Anivra. Then the Kalim of Atzilus have to are then responsive to the Eir that's higher than the Kalim of Atzilus. All to the point that the Eir itself now gets connected to the Etzem Eir. So it's like three stages. The Yesh discovers the divine within the Yesh, in the Yesh. The Kalim of Atzilus recognize the Eir within them to the point that they start recognizing that Eir that's higher than the Eir that comes into the Kalim, what he calls Primis ve'atzmus ha'Eir, as was explained at length. Again, he says Ba'erich. The Kol Zeh says all this. This is the yichud of Havaya and Elokim. Elokim, remember, is Tzimtzum, into Kalim, Hisalmus, concealment. Havaya is the Eir that's higher than that. So this is the yichud that we accomplish through our Aveda Mamata Lamaila, from bottom up, and Birurim. Dala Oretz Mitochas. This is the yichud of Havaya Elokim on the earth below, because we're beginning from below in the earth. The Hainu b'bechinas ha'er shalahoyres ha'elemis, which means in the air that radiates in the worlds. So it begins from Oretz B'tachas, the earth below. We discover the divine energy, and then step by step, that energy gets revealed that's higher than concealment, to the point that it draws even the air, the primis ve'atzmus ha'er. But he hasn't explained yet Shamayim Emal. That's Oretz Metachas. Havaya Elokim, as it is in the earth below. The next paragraph is going to say, what's about Shamayim Emal, the heaven above? What is there? What the Yichud Havaya Elokim, how does it manifest there? That's going to be the next section. But before I continue, let me stop if there are any questions. No? Okay.
Yes, I have a couple of questions, Rabbi. One is
you never disappoint.
This when it says that through this Birurim we are able to bring down a light that's l'mayla mihishalmus into the Kalim. Is that the light that's above Atzilus in the Kav, or is that what's this light that we're bringing down through this incredible vote of Birurim? Where was that coming from? Is that what kind of light is that? It's not before Tzimtzum Rishon, right before the radical Tzimtzum here. We're not talking about that level, right? We're talking about a kav above Atzilus?
Well, okay, a few things. Really, this requires going back to learn the Maimorim before because he spelled it out in detail. Briefly, it's like this. There are three levels here. There's the Eir, Etzema Eir, that's higher than Eiris and Kalim and Atzilus. I'm going from the top down. There's the Eiris and Kalim and Atzilus, and then there's the Eiris and Kalim as they are in Biyah, all the way down to this world. Three general levels. So when we're talking here is that the Birurim from below, what they do first thing is they make the Yesh. I'm reading now, if you look at the page, the bottom of 1179, he spells out like this. Okay. Then he goes on and says, that the next step is the bitla hakelim of Atzilus. That the next step you come to discover that it's not just the divine on our terms, which is the first level we just spoke about, but there's a divine, the Eiris and Kelim of Atzilus, and it's the bitla hakelim. And the Kalim come to recognize that there's an Eir that's even higher than the Eir within the Kalim of Atzilus. That's what he says on the bottom of page 1179. Then he goes on and says, okay. And then he goes on and says that there's this third level, Das Elyon Amiti, he calls it. Today Amitis is where you come to discover the Etzem. The Etzem Ha'er. So in general, that would be the third level that he's talking about here. That you're coming to discover the Etzem Ha'er, which would be the Eir that is higher than the Eiris and Kelim and Atzilus. However, in the macrocosm, he did discuss that the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti and the Ayin of the Yesh Nivra are also all the way before the Tzimtzum. So we did discuss how we go from the Kalim, the Yesh turns to the Elokus within the Yesh. The Kalim turn to the Eir. The Eir turns to the root of its Eir all the way in the highest levels of the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti. However, it's clear here that he didn't yet get to Shemayim Mimal. So what's not clear to me is how many levels you're actually discussing here before we get to what's heaven above, which definitely is on a higher level than what we learned from Aretz Mitachas. But I would wait to see, once we finish reading the next paragraph, then we can sum it up properly. But right now, just suffice it to say that in general, it's a three-step process. Question is, whether you talk a microcosm or macrocosm. Now, if you go back to the whole discussion of Rotze and Shuv, which I too need to refresh myself, I'm talking now, I mentioned yesterday the pages. So he said the following. I'm going back pretty far back. Let me see here. The Tzoma, Rotze v'Shuv. So if you look on page, for example, on page, starts on page 1015, Aleph Tezvov, 1015. So you see that he says, Yem v'layla b'aveda rotze v'shuv. And there's a whole discussion what that means. That's very relevant to our conversation here. But if you look at the next page, not next page, on 1019, he says, Nimtza de b'chol ha'madreges, heim b'neshamas lamata, u'b'malachim l'mayla, u'b'kelim, they all have an element of rotze, which is being drawn upward, which is what our Aveda generates. That instead of looking down and looking at ourselves, self-contained, but we look up. So then he said, Then he goes on and says there's a difference between the Ratzeh of Kalim and the Ratzeh of Ur. On page 1022. So now the Ratzeh in Kalim, like the Ratzeh down below, is not as powerful as the Ratzeh in Ur, because Ur by nature is in a state of natural cleaving and being drawn to its source. So clearly there's a Ratzeh that comes more like on a lower level, from the Kalim upward, from the Yesh upward, and from the Kalim to the Ur. And then there's a Ratzeh from the Ur to higher levels of Ur, which would be what he calls here, Primis ve'atzmus ha'Ur. But I want to go back and really look, there's different details discussed earlier, different places where he talks about all these elements. But what I said for sure sums up the discussion. So the point is, Malmaila Lamata, God's creation, like he says in the Torah of the Magid, Asa Kama Elamis, Asa Kama Tzimtzumim, and Asa Kama Elamis. God drew the energy downward through Tzimtzum, both effects of the Tzimtzum, level by level, all the way down. Our Aveda is to reverse the process and beginning from the bottom up to turn upward, and every level in like a ripple effect. Think of it like a ripple effect. As we turn upward, the level above us turns upward as well, until the Eir itself reaches upward all the way to Etzem Ha'Eir, Atzmus Ha'Eir. And all that is now generated by and being drawn into existence. But this is still part of it because we still want to talk about the next section. What is Havaya Elokim and Shemayim Mimal? So we talked about Havaya Elokim. From the Tzimtzum we come, transforming the Tzimtzum through Birurim, and that ultimately draws the energy that's higher than concealment even to the Atzmus Ha'Eir. But now is going to come the next step, which is Shemayim Mimal. Well, we'll stop here before this next paragraph. So I hope that helps, but I definitely recommend looking earlier, because earlier is discussed far more at length. I trying to sum it up, but I'm sure I'm missing some points, and there's probably more language and more details.
Could I ask another quick question on that piece? When it says the bottom line, "V'kolzehu b'chinas yichud davaya Elokim da'al ha'aretz mitachas." Why does it use the word da'al, alta? Well, you would think that at the lowest levels it's b'teicha aretz. Why is it upon the Gashmias, higher than the Gashmias? Wouldn't you think that's we're doing it from the lowest level within the Gashmi itself, not al, but teicha aretz?
The language of the pasuk is va'al ha'aretz mitachas.
Yes.
You're asking a question on the pasuk or on the Rebbe Rashab?
No, on the Rebbe Rashab.
The Rebbe Rashab is using the expression of the pasuk is ki Havaya Elokim b'shamayim mimal, in the heavens above, ala ha'aretz mitachas, and on the earth below. So that's the pasuk. So he's using the language of the verse.
Yeah, it's still or is always on top of everything. It doesn't.
Why is it on top? See, or is panemius or mamale. Mamale goes within the within you and me, within the
First of all, again, the question, the pasuk says ala aretz mitachas. So let's make sure we understand that.
Yeah, I know that.
Rebbe Rashab is just using the verse of the expression. In the pasuk it says bishamayim mimal v'ala aretz mitachas. So you're asking, why doesn't it say bishamayim mimal ubiha aretz mitachas?
Right.
That's what you're.
Yes.
There's different ways we can speculate. He doesn't say anything about it. It would be my speculation. I don't know if it's discussed elsewhere in Chassidus. It may be. I'd have to look. But my first knee-jerk reaction would be, without thinking much, because at the end of the day, you want to elevate the aretz mitachas. It's not about just that. Yes, the energy does permeate, but you want to say that the yichud. Remember, the pasuk goes, "Havaya Elokim ala aretz mitachas." Havaya Elokim is upon the earth, the ground below, and it could be bishamayim. It could be because there the shamayim is more of a keli for it. Anyway, that's my first reaction, but it's a good question, needs to be thought through.
You're right, he's using the lashon of the pasuk.
Yeah,
but the question is, why does the pasuk not say biha aretz mitachas?
Right.
So fine, we'll think about it. I don't have more to say more without looking into it a bit further.
בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת.
Yeah, Rabbi Teitel, we
What?
know, but it says
We know what it
b'shamayim,
says.
within-
We're
okay.
asking why. Why doesn't it say beha'aretz
Yeah.
metochas like it says b'shamayim mima'al? I think in Shaykhid V'Amuna, which of course is also built on this pasuk. Anyway, I have to look it up. I can't answer without looking into it more.